today. And I am thrilled to have this opportunity for a conversation with JoAnna and with Naomi, and we'll get into our conversation in a minute. But because there are some of you that don't know about HerCsuite, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you anything about us. So HerCsuite started with that were the result of the 5 people that we surround ourselves with, and we can make our own seat at the table. That was the original idea, and our own board of directors. And we are committed to advancing and engaging more women at every career phase. We do that through turnkey speaker events, leadership development, like our mentoring programs and executive development, and exclusive programs like this one today. HerCsuite Boards is chaired by Naomi Kent, who many of you know, and it's really designed around helping you land your next board role. And that is why today's conversation is going to be so fantastic, because we are going to hear from 2 experts about what it takes to get on a board. So I'm going to introduce Naomi Kent, and I'm going to turn it over to her to make the introduction to JoAnna. But I am so excited to have Naomi as our board's chair. She has an incredible background in leadership, in boards, in knowledge around building communities, as well as startups. She's also an advisor and a speaker for our turnkey speaker events. And Naomi, I am grateful for you for introducing JoAnna to our audience. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks very much, Natalie. I'm Naomi Kent. I lead the HerCsuite board program. It's designed to get you prepared and positioned correctly to take on corporate boards. And today I'm delighted to be joined by JoAnna Sohovich. Now, rather than reading out her bio, I'm sure you've all read it and you have it there in front of you. I want to make a couple of points about her that I think are really important before we get started with the questions. So JoAnna served in the US Navy and also worked a long career in corporate. So she combines these 2 areas of expertise and experience to be an effective board director today. Now, today she now serves on a corporate board as the chair, so she'll be talking more about that, and is planning to continue to build on her board career in the future. I also want to shout out, I don't know if Will Clark is on. I want to thank Will Clark for introducing us, a mutual friend. But JoAnna, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, good afternoon, Naomi. It's my pleasure.
Excellent. Well, let's start with the Navy. So tell us about why and how you joined the Navy.
I wish I could say that it was a master plan in service to our country, but really I was an 18-year-old teenager just trying to get into a good school. And I had applied to a lot of different schools, and the Naval Academy was one of them, but I didn't even know what an officer was. I was actually pretty distracted by the schools that I had gotten into when it came time to do college visits. And when I got to the Naval Academy to do my visit, I just had a huge epiphany. The schools that I visited and the students that I was paired with before barely got out of bed to go to class. And when I went to the Naval Academy, people were working out before morning formation. They were carrying 23 credit hours. They were doing their professional responsibilities. Everyone was an athlete. And I had worked so hard as a high schooler to be well-rounded enough to get into a good college. I just fell in love with how disciplined everybody was. And in my mind, if I went to the Naval Academy, it would force me to continue to challenge myself and to continue to be well-rounded. All that ignorance about the Navy and the armed forces, the Naval Academy rectified by like about day 3. and I did grow to love service and value that. But as an 18-year-old, I just really liked how challenging it would be.
Fantastic. And so you spent, was it 5 years in the Navy? Excellent.
Yes.
So,
all the service academies still require a 5-year obligation after graduation.
Got it. And then tell us a little bit about why you left and then you moved on into a career.
Well, I loved the Navy. I thought that it was really challenging, and it is the quintessential equal pay organization. If you're qualified for the job, you get the work and you get paid according to your rank. But at the time I was married, and back in 1993 to 1998, there weren't a ton of women in the Navy, and it was very difficult to get co-located. So after I finished my sea tour and was looking forward to coming back from the Persian Gulf and being co-located with my husband. We had difficulty in doing that, and the Navy decided that they would rather send me to Yokosuka, Japan instead of California. So at that point, I just had to have a really thoughtful discussion with my husband about how long the next 15 years of marriage would be if we couldn't get our 2-year shore tours to line up. And we both decided to resign our commissions. That's no longer a problem. When I talk to young women in the armed forces today, they've really kind of caught up and figured out how to get couples co-located. But for me at the time, it was a big consideration.
Got it. And so we're going to sort of fast forward a little bit. And you can maybe give us a bit of information about your first sort of career, what you walked into. But your first sort of C-suite role was a COO, a Chief Operating Officer role. Tell us about how you got there and what that was like.
At the time, I was really ready for more responsibility. And I kept hearing comments about how I wasn't old enough, or what was my hurry, or somebody else didn't do it until they were 40. And I just fundamentally was not willing to accept my career development opportunities to get older. And that was it. But when I thought about it, I had reflected upon all the people who reported to me who really wanted to be invested in. But some people weren't willing to invest in themselves. They weren't willing to go back to school to change their associate's degree to a bachelor's degree, or they weren't willing to take a transfer. They wanted the company to invest in them, but they didn't want to co-invest. And so I decided to take that principle and went to my leadership team and I said, look, the next job I want is this. And I'm willing to do any job in the company, anywhere in the world, as long as we agree that if I'm successful, I'll be more qualified for that job. And that really set them back. They were surprised that I would be willing to take that amount of risk. They tested me. They offered a couple jobs that didn't seem like a great fit for me. And I said I would be willing to do them, and they moved on. So ultimately, they asked me to do an acquisition integration job, reporting right to Dave Cody. And I did well, and the job that I wanted opened up around the end of that assignment, and we had kind of agreed already. So that's how I got it. I'm just willing to take risk and willing to take the hard jobs and voicing that willingness.
Fantastic. And I'm sure a lot of that was driven from the training, right, that you had been through in the Navy. So tell us about the first board that you joined. Tell us a bit about the board and then how you got on the board.
I was at I think Fortune Most Powerful Women conference, and we were listening to a panel talk about recruiters and how recruiters call and they just seem so off base about what your next job is. It seems like they look back 20 years and ask you if you'd be interested in something like that. And the really good advice that they gave us was, recruiters are only as current as their database. And instead of being insulted and saying no, you need to redirect them about what your skill set is. And so for me, I applied that to not my next job, but my first board. And so when recruiters would call me and say, hey, are you interested in doing this job at A, B, and C? I would say, no, I'm doing well here at Stanley Black & Decker. I'm happy. But if your board practice is looking for somebody who is good at manufacturing technology in global companies with strong brands and good channels and implementing IoT technology into these durable good industries, then I'm your person. And essentially, I just gave them the words that they needed to update their database, and then boards started coming, across my desk with those types of profiles. It wasn't just any board; it was boards that were a good fit for me.
That's wonderful. And I think that's a really important point. I think everybody here on the call will agree. And I know a lot of you on the call are either on boards or seeking new boards. And I think getting the right fit is absolutely important. So boards really, I think as well, they help you grow as a person, as a professional. They give you experiences and a network that is extremely unique. Tell us about how you grew as a person on boards and how that changed you.
I was lucky enough to sit on my first public company board before I became a CEO. And I think it was so helpful for me to understand what happens on the other side of that table and get perspective of how the board feels, particularly the compensation committee. Because, you know, when you're management and you don't understand the fiduciary responsibility of a board and the stewardship and how they're trying to balance the needs of management versus the needs of the shareholders, then you can get very myopic as an executive. And so, you know, what my first board taught me was essentially what it's like to sit on the other side of the table, so that, you know, when I would propose things, or when I would give presentations, or when I would curate conversations, I would understand what their interests were and make sure that I had very balanced recommendations. So when I did get my first CEO job, I think I was a better CEO. I had less of a learning curve in interacting with that board of directors than I would have had I not had that opportunity beforehand.
Yeah, I think those they go hand in hand, right? Definitely. And tell us about, so you know, we were just chatting before the call about, you know, arriving on time and some rules and things that you learn in the military, and maybe doing some push-ups as a result of not having arrived on time. But just there's a small example. But what were the skills and the training that you did in the military that you can share with everybody here? I know there are some people here who are military veterans, but who perhaps the people who aren't, what did you learn that you can share with us that works for your board career or executive career even? Yeah.
I think one area that has been particularly useful for me is to be responsible for subject matter experts who were more trained than I was to do their job. I look at leaders in three categories. There might be more, but this is the way I've broken it down. One is the leaders who feel like they need to know all the answers and tell everybody what to do. They feel like they need to be the expert. The second category is leader as teacher. They feel that it's a little bit like the first one, but they feel like they're teaching people what to do so that they can do it themselves the next time. And then the third category is the leader as the enabler, where you take the best of the aptitudes and the knowledge and the experience of your team, but you fill in the white space. You don't necessarily tell them what to do or teach them what to do. Ultimately, you're accountable for the outcome, and you may need to be the deciding vote, but really curating your team to arrive at the right decision. And I learned that third category of leadership because I had so many subject matter experts who'd done their job and been in the Navy and been to multiple schools before me. I was comfortable not knowing the answer, but still leading our team to a successful conclusion. So I've been probably in 7 different industries in the business world, and not a lot of people make the jump from one industry to another industry successfully because they're missing so much subject matter expertise. And I think that Navy experience is what allowed me to make the jump from industry to industry and be comfortable not being the smartest person in the room, but confident that alongside my team, we could be successful.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like, and I think I've spoken about this a lot, a sort of coaching style, right, of leadership, really enabling people to make the decisions, and you guiding that process. So that's really interesting. So I know that you've served on the board, actually you've served as the chair on the board of a Blackstone company. Tell us about that role and tell us a bit about that experience. Blackstone, obviously one of the largest companies in the world, and you know, we've heard a lot of stories about how demanding they are. So we'd love to hear more.
Okay, so the company that I was the CEO of was a family-owned company named Chamberlain Group. The largest manufacturer of garage door openers, gate openers, telephone entry systems, and so forth. And my job during the 6 years that I was CEO was to transform it, both the culture and the technology, into the Internet of Things. So our MyQ app can give you remote notifications. You can have your Amazon packages delivered into your garage and so forth. The family decided last year at the beginning of the year, to conduct a valuation exercise. And the output of that valuation exercise was so positive, then they decided to move forward into a sale process. Blackstone was the ultimate winner of that sale process. And as I mentioned to you, Naomi, I declined the CEO position under Blackstone. I had personal commitments that I really wanted to honor, but they came right back and said, okay, if you won't be the CEO, will you be the chair? I was really surprised that they asked me to be the chair, I kind of thought that I would have to walk away. And it was hard for me to walk away, but it really ended up being the best of both worlds, because nobody knows that strategy like I do, and nobody knows the team and the workforce like I do. But it allowed my successor to step up and take the helm and gain the responsibility that he was looking for, with a little bit of a steady hand from me at times when he needed it. The challenging part for me was not working for Blackstone. Blackstone's a machine. It's amazing. They did due diligence in like 3 weeks. And my team said they were the best of all the buyers in terms of thoroughness of due diligence. Like, they would just come in and find whatever little weak spot there was and immediately pinpoint it and move forward. So they knew what they were doing. But what I found challenging is then I had to stand up a board that didn't exist. And we needed a 10-member board of directors where one hadn't existed before. And so that was a new activity for me. Thankfully, Blackstone has a really competent function. Many people have probably heard of Courtney Delacava, and she was my wingman. She helped me to identify the right players and the skill sets. She has an amazing Rolodex. And shockingly, it's a lot easier to get somebody to say yes to being on a Blackstone board than it was to try to sell the story for Chamberlain Group before that. So people like the Chamberlain Group story, but they also really like the Blackstone story. And we were able to get that done effectively.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think that the, having obviously been an executive in the company, it probably gave you a lot of insight to being the chair on the board, but partly it was some personal reasons, right, that you wanted to step back. So I found that quite interesting that they wanted you to come back. So tell us a bit more about the personal experience that you had.
I have a 15-year-old son, and I have run global companies since before he was in my womb. And so, his entire life, I've been pulling a rollerboard suitcase into his swim meet, trying to make it before he did his event, and just really trying to juggle it and trying to figure out how to access that whole quality time equation with being a good executive. And during the time that, right before the time that we conducted the valuation exercise, my son decided to transfer schools from Chicagoland area, where I lived and worked and we were all a family, to Jacksonville, Florida. And so during 2021, when I was doing this valuation exercise and trying to run a company and dealing with the war on talent and meeting with potential buyers, my son was in Jacksonville, Florida. And I don't know if you believe remote work works, but I don't believe remote parenting works. It didn't for me. So I just felt when we got through the entire process, I just felt I wasn't good at either. And I only had 4 years at the time. Now it's 3 years left of my son to live at home before he goes away to college. And that was a scarce resource. It wasn't something I could delay until later. It was a very difficult decision, and it was a very unpopular decision. Lots of people gave me their advice, whether I asked for it or not. And there were a lot of people who said, don't give up that CEO job, figure out how to do both. But ultimately, I knew the right thing was to step down and spend this time with my son. And I was prepared to walk away from everything in order to do so.
I mean, let's not, being the chair of the board is obviously a big role too, but it just doesn't require, right? I mean,
that wasn't on the table when I was making this decision, though.
Yeah,
I thought I was walking away in shame.
Right. You didn't step down, but you stepped sideways and down, right? So no, I think you still a lot of work, but you've obviously prioritizing other things, which I think is really interesting. And I hear this from people all the time, whether it's family, health, whatever it might be. They're always afraid to make that decision, and I think that you made it, and it is actually working in your favor. So that's really great to hear. Now, obviously, you've been in the military, where we know in the Navy and in any military division, there are a very small portion of women who enlist and join. You're also one of the only women sometimes in the boardroom and in the room, in the executive room. Well, how does that work? How do you feel about that? Or is it just normal for you?
It's normal for me. My high school was previously an all boys high school that let girls in. The Naval Academy, also previously an all boys institution that let women in. I went into aerospace, fairly male dominated, networking industry, just all the industries I've been in were pretty male dominated. And that's the first question people ask me is, how are you going to manage in a male dominated industry? And I would just laugh and say, you know, compared to being in the Persian Gulf with 3,000 Marines, it's going to be easy. But on the flip side, it makes me I don't count gender. I don't notice it when I'm at the table. And I did when I became an officer at Stanley Black & Decker. The CEO stood up and said, "It's about time we have a woman at this table." And I actually looked around and he said, "Yes, JoAnna, it's you, in case you're wondering." and it wasn't that, obviously I know I'm a woman, but I didn't realize that there weren't other women sitting at the table when he had invited me to this. So I don't necessarily experience the same level of isolation maybe, or I don't know what other women feel when for the first time they're the only woman in the room. I empathize with it and I recognize that it's a real thing, but for me, I just don't think in those terms.
That's wonderful. And then what do you've served on a public company board. What do you enjoy most about that? And I'm sure there are people here on the call. I know if Will's here, he's joined a public company as well. Tell us about what you really enjoy about that.
There's a couple things. One is, I mentioned before, I've been in a lot of different industries. So I like the analogs. I like being able to take my experience in completely different industries or even related industries and share ideas with how we can do things differently that maybe the executives from that industry hadn't thought of or hadn't been exposed to. So I just really like being able to apply the analogs from my experience or different industries. The second thing that I like is it's very challenging. You know, this is one of those the strength is the weakness. The amount of responsibility that board members take on today is greater than at any other time in history. And some people don't like that or they don't want that. I tend to gravitate towards accountability and responsibility. And I like being able to step up and figure out how to win in a hard environment.
Fantastic. And then obviously this is a unique space, but you also bring a lot of unique qualities and a lot of skills. And I think, again, a lot of people who are preparing to get onto boards, I think it's the number one area that they need to explore, which is, what do I bring to a board? What's unique about me? Having served on boards and having been a CEO, what do you think, what do you feel like is the most important few things that you bring to boards?
Well, first off, the way that you framed that was really good. Sometimes people think of, what do I want in a board? And they'll talk to the recruiters or the interviewers about what they want. And really, you just need to flip the sentence and say, here's where a board gets value from me. These are the things that I'm good at. And these are the types of things that I can bring to a board. And so rather than me saying that I want to be part of a board that has manufactured goods technology in the Internet of Things space, connected home, connected building, connected factory, I can say, here is what my experience is and what I can bring to a board. I have the manufacturing experience. I have the Internet of Things experience. I have the cultural transformation experience. And this is what I can offer to a board. So I think just framing it that way from the start puts you off on the right foot. The second thing, so what do I specifically bring to a board? I find that boards look to me when, again, it's manufactured goods, durable technology, but not all boards are looking at that. The technology aspect is attractive. There's a lot of industrials that have tried to make the leap from a durable to a tech company or an IoT type device, and they haven't been able to do that. And so having a track record of success, I think, is attractive to boards. Certainly, more boards are taking into consideration their diversity, both their gender and their racial diversity. So as a woman and as a Latina, that's helpful to them. I hope no board would sacrifice the skill sets that they're looking for, but I hope that they would embrace the additional perspectives that I can bring to the board that maybe would enliven or enrich the discussion that we have in the boardroom. So those are some of the things that I see boards looking for in general and specifically when they reach out to me.
And the leadership aspect is also very important. I'm going to actually hand it over to questions from the audience right now, but there is somebody who's just asked a question. So please, any questions that you have for JoAnna, please throw them into the chat. And then I have a question just at the end. But someone said, and obviously we talked about what you enjoy most about being on a board, but without obviously disclosing anything that is confidential, tell us about some challenging situations that you have, well, either as an executive, they've said, this is Pat question, either as an executive, as a board director, what are some of those challenges that you can share with us?
I'll give you the executive and then I'll give you the board member perspective. So it's easy as an executive to feel like your board members don't understand and or that maybe their knowledge is dated. And really trying to understand what the, and I've used this word before, what the analog is, even if they haven't run a company in your industry or they haven't been the CEO through a global pandemic or something like that, they do bring a lot of experience to the equation. And so it's important to not get defensive and to really look for the communication and to think about your board members as they're on your team, and to coach your directs that way, because I've seen leadership teams who just really act like we're us and the board is them. And you're not getting great value out of your board members if you're treating them as them. As a board member, it's difficult for me to, and this is just my personality, having been a leader for so many years, I'm driven towards direct accountability. And so it's hard for me to just be an advisor. It's hard for me to bring up the topic and bring it up in a way that, how are you thinking about this? Or what is your strategy in this area? Or what are your plans regarding this? And have you thought about this? Rather than, oh, when I did it, here's how it worked. And you guys should do this and use this company and, do it this way. I have to just be really careful that I'm not trying to superimpose my strategy on the leadership team of the company on whose board I serve.
Yeah, I think it's really important. We talk a lot about noses in, fingers out, right? Mm-hmm. There's a phrase that is used at the board level really to describe that very situation. Thank you for that. So Natalie has asked, have you seen or do you know of any financial benefit to organizations when they bring in a diverse team, when they have a diverse group on the board or a diverse executive team? And diversity, I guess we can take it in any way we want, right? In terms of skill sets and background and opinions and all kinds of things.
Well, certainly, I know the studies are out there and certainly statistically there's a correlation. The argument tends to be around causation and whether people really believe that a diverse board is the cause of more successful companies from a financial perspective. But I think it's simple. If you have a lot of people with a similar background, you're not going to get different perspectives. It's one of the things that I value being from 7 different industries. If I haven't seen it in the security industry, well, then I may have already come across it in the HVAC industry, or when I was building tools, or when I was in the Navy or something like that. And so the same thing comes with any other type of diversity, diversity of age or gender or socioeconomic status or race or religion. You tend to get some really interesting perspectives when you bring people together, and it's not a lot of people agreeing because they've had this similar experience. It's more difficult. I will be the first to admit, I love to think I'm a collaborative leader, but my heart really just wants everyone to agree with me and to go through the process of everybody inserting their perspectives is exhausting. I joke that I hate the process. I love the outcome. And I'm able to transition because I'm self-aware that I hate the process, but I love the outcome. And so I throw myself in there and I make myself participate and I counsel myself to have patience and I try not to be overly influential to the discussion. And every single time I love the outcome. I think some people who don't have that level of self-awareness try to avoid it. and they just really like people to agree with them, and that's validating that their opinion is right. But it's not always the best outcome, in my opinion.
Well, I don't think you're alone in that. I think there's probably a lot of people on this call and who will be listening to the recording who are thinking exactly the same thing. So I think when you've run a business and you've been the leader, there's a huge transition that needs to take place, right? To get into that board member, that advisory role, and to essentially collaborate with each other to get to the right decision. Somebody has actually asked about transferable skills across industries, and this probably applies when anybody here is getting on a board, because you really don't have to be limited to the industries that you've been on when you seek out board positions. So somebody has said sort of she's been through a journey of going through from the pharma life sciences industry and trying to step out of it. Do you have any advice on how you framed this kind of move, this transition, this bridging between one area and another, and what experience do you sort of draw on to sort of present that?
It's easy to get pigeonholed, but it's actually probably not even a great thing to be on the board of the same industry that you've been in. Sometimes there are conflicts of interest or things like that. So I do think it's important to be able to be transferable. And the way that I think about it is, when I talk to you about the skills that I bring to a board, I didn't mention any industry. I said, here's what I'm good at. I'm good at running manufactured goods companies with strong brands and strong channels internationally that are acquiring companies and that have or are interested in transitioning into the Internet of Things or technology. And so, that could be a lot of industries. And then when you frame it that way and you tell people generically, this is what I'm good at, this is where a board can get value from me, this is what I can offer to the discussion in the boardroom, then it takes a lot less creativity for them to picture you in the role. And it's all about translating it for them. If you get frustrated because they're not able to translate it for themselves, then I think you might be frustrated for a while.
No, it's a very good point, right? And I think if you read a lot of board bios and board resumes and board documents, you'll actually see a lot of people move away from the industry and more toward the values and the experience and the relatable experience, which I think is important. Now, talking of relatable experience, you've obviously been the CEO of a company. You were able to achieve that at a pretty young age. That's what they told you anyway. So is C-level experience absolutely essential for getting onto a board? And does that make you more effective? Or what would be your advice to someone who perhaps isn't or has never been a C-level executive?
I mentioned earlier, I was not a CEO when I was on my first board. I was the president of the industrial tools business for Stanley Black & Decker. And it was difficult for me to find my first board because of that. I think if you're a CEO, it's easy for people to want you on their board. And it's almost a cruel joke that you can't get a board before you're a CEO, but once you're a CEO, you're so busy, you can't even answer those calls that you get every single week of people wanting you to be on their board. Luckily, I joined a board that there were a couple boards that were interested, and they were interested in a few things. So first off, they were willing to bet on me that I was on the CEO track. And so they were kind of willing to lead the puck a little bit. But the second thing that I had to offer that a lot of the CEOs and retired CEOs, I get really retired CEOs, because a lot of times when you're an active CEO, you can't sit on a lot of boards. Maybe you can sit on one. And there are exceptions. I still scratch my head and wonder how they can juggle more than one board. And so you tend to get a lot of retired CEOs. Retired CEOs bring wonderful experience to the table. I'm one of them. But there's also, again, if you're looking for diversity, a sitting executive is fighting in the trenches today and sees the things that are happening right now and can bring some interesting questions and some interesting discussions to the boardroom. And so if you can present that as a strength, and that, I am a sitting executive, and, I have a lot of contemporaneous issues that I can help contribute to the discussion on the board, that just might be something that could overrule the board's desire to have a sitting or newly retired CEO.
And I think also it depends what kind of board you're looking to join, right? And what we talked before about fit. I mean, we didn't talk about it in a lot of depth, but you found the right fit. They found you. It was the right fit, and sometimes that doesn't need to be the CEO experience. You might be hired to the board for another reason. Kathy Scala, who Kathy leads our DE&I group here at HerCsuite, she actually mentioned. She said that there are many options on ESG. The governance, but maybe the environmental and the social. Sorry, there are many opinions, sorry, on ESG, not as many on the E and the S. So how is your board addressing the ES part of the ESG? And do you have any thoughts on it in general?
I agree. ESG is becoming increasingly important to shareholders. And boards, especially their governance committees, are being questioned. It is the topic of most of the shareholder calls right now for the board that I sit on. Unless you have a comp blip or something like that that causes the topic to shift, people are really wanting to know how the company is thinking about ESG, what they're committing to, what progress they're making. You should be publishing an ESG guidebook of what your company's doing and so forth. But it is the Wild West out there, because if you were to put all of them side by side, there would be many different interpretations. And so I completely agree with you, Kathy. When you look at the guidebooks and the materials, it's pretty strong on the G side, because governance was a committee for the boards, and a lot of time has been spent fleshing that out. On the E and the S side, some companies are really diving into it, or it's been part of their DNA. Other companies are racing to catch up. There's a third category, though. The third category is companies that are doing something about it, but they're unwilling to divulge too much before they're required to, because it can be a double-edged sword. If you divulge too much, it ends up becoming a commitment, and then people are looking for measures the next year, and so on and so forth. And you just really don't even know where it's headed. So I do see companies really evolving their ESG footprint, especially on the environmental and social side. They track it in the boardroom, but they aren't necessarily documenting or publishing everything that they're doing and everything that they're tracking until there becomes a little bit more structure to what's required, what's going to be expected, and what's the trajectory going to be. And then there's other companies who just hope it'll go away. and I feel bad for those companies, because it's not going to. So they need to catch up.
Really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. We've got time for two more questions that are in the chat here. So Ralph Hurt, he said that, are there any tools, maybe systems, that board directors are used to collaborate effectively? Is there any technology that they use to contribute or to make their outcomes more visible, and any reporting that's done? Like, is there any new technology that's out there that helps to make the board more effective?
I just would like a clarifying question. Is it with your fellow board members? Is it with the executive team that you interact with? What's the context?
Yeah, I think it's probably all of the above. I think it's probably interacting, and then also maybe even learning more about the executives in the company. Yeah, or learning about the company itself and how it's doing.
Okay, so we'll start out with learning about the company. There's typically an immersion period when you start as a board member, and the company usually hosts sessions that you meet with all the different functions and the different executives that chair the committees, and you maybe tour one of the sites and you learn all about the business. And so if the company doesn't offer that in the beginning, you should ask for that, and don't be embarrassed for asking for that, because otherwise it takes you so much longer to learn that information over the course of say 4 or 5 board meetings a year for years and years. Ask for that in terms of learning. Second, ask questions. You don't need to interrupt at the board meeting, but sometimes I've had new board members who will instant message me and say, what is this acronym? What are they talking about? Something like that. And maybe find a buddy or get assigned a partner to be able to transit that learning curve, because it's just like starting a new job in a company. it's okay to ask the questions in the first 6 months, but if you don't know the answer after that, then you might be viewed as a little slow or lacking. In terms of collaborating with the executives and your fellow board members, you really should follow the guidelines that your company sets. Some companies are very sophisticated around let's not put things in emails and text messages and notebooks that maybe could be misinterpreted later when you look at it 3 years down the road and you're trying to remember what was my mindset when I said this thing or I asked this thing. They are very careful around discoverable material. So boards use technologies sometimes like diligent board books and other types of board book companies that will not only house their materials, but have chat sessions and things like that. But I also find, and this took me a while to get my arms around it, just spending time with your fellow board members one-on-one. I've actually reached out and when I've been in their city and asked to have dinner with them or just deliberately gone. I went down to Miami a few weeks ago and just spent a couple days with one of my fellow board members and just got to know them. It really heads off misunderstandings. if you know and like your fellow board members, you assume good intent, and you don't end up with with this situation where you can't discuss something that you don't necessarily agree on, and feel like they're out to get you. It's a way to embrace the diversity of thoughts and opinions by getting to know the other individual and assuming good intent. I also meet one-on-one with executives, especially now that I'm the head of the comp committee for the public board. I spend a lot of time with executives, and I just try to use the technology and the norms that they've created, because again, you don't want a board member putting things on Slack that the company hasn't embraced, or putting things even in notebooks if the company doesn't want you to keep a written documentation of your board materials.
Wonderful. And then I think one of your friends is online here, Anastasia from Stanley Black & Decker. She said it's great to see you again. And she asked if there is an increase in boards seeking the sort of CHRO, the human capital side of things for new board directors. Is that a new skill that they're looking for?
I think it depends on the board. Every board should have a board matrix, and they should understand what are the skill sets that they need to be successful as a board, and what executives are able to bring that, and then where they need to go out and source that. I do think that the human capital equation, back to Kathy's question about ESG and the S side of ESG, really is making boards sit up and say, we don't just need a technology transformation, we also need a cultural transformation. And that was my charter when I joined as Chamberlain CEO, and thankfully the family valued that equally to the technology transformation. Boards are beginning to realize that as well, particularly since we are in a bit of a strange time with regards to workforces, and we can't seem to figure out, is it the Great Resignation, or jobs going away, or are people ever going to come back in the office, and why are people so burnt out, and how do you engage your workforce, and what about the remote workforce? Can you ever build a culture? There's a lot of complex things that have never existed in the past, and perhaps the CHRO would be able to bring a richer discussion to the boardroom as a result.
Fantastic. And just to wrap up here, so if there are people on the call here who are thinking about either starting or continuing to serve on boards, and they're wondering what kinds of board opportunities or how they should be going about gaining board opportunities, and I think we're going to be very vague here. Maybe we'll talk about private versus public. I mean, there might be some differences there, but what would your advice be to anybody who is looking to gain a new board seat?
It really leads back to what we talked about earlier in terms of fit. It's easy to feel like, think about when you applied to college, if everyone has at one point applied to college as a kid, it's easy to say, I just need to get into a college. And then you don't have that epiphany until maybe you start visiting, or maybe even you're already in college and you realize that you should have been interviewing them the whole time. You should have tried to figure out, where do I want to be and where's a good fit? It's the same way with boards. In the beginning, I was really discouraged that people said, well, she's only 40 years old and she's not a CEO and no one knows her and we don't want her on our board. Well, guess what? I probably wouldn't want to be on that board because they wouldn't value my input. And I'd be the little sister at the table that wouldn't really have a voice. And so, I learned that to be very forthright about what I can bring to a board, and to try to find the board that wants that. And that's really excited about that, and wants me to sit on their board so that I can bring those things. And so it really is about fit and match. Invest some time in saying what your value proposition is, and then look for the boards that embrace that. It's also not inappropriate to ask to speak to all the board members. You know, they may ask you to just interview with 3 people, the head of the governance, the chair, and one other volunteer person. But you could say, I really want to talk to everybody on the board. I want to understand how people interact. I want to understand what the perspectives are. And sometimes you get even more excited because you meet some really great people that you look forward to serving with. And sometimes you say, I just can't put my finger on it, but you know, that this is probably not something that I would really be able to excel in. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of balance and trying to make sure it's a good fit. You don't sit on a board for just 1 or 2 years and then trade up. It really is a commitment, and you're expected to stick around for enough of a period of time that you can add value to the board.
Wonderful. Well, JoAnna, listen, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to do the, what was it, the Navy, the time, tide, and formation?
Oh, yes,
Time,
we're
tide,
way
and
ahead.
formation with everyone.
Right, exactly. It's 12:45 Central, 1:45 Eastern. So I'm going to wrap up, and thank you very much for joining us. Natalie, over to you.
Yes, thank you. What an incredible conversation. So amazing, and honored to have you here with us, JoAnna, and also Naomi Kent. If you have any questions about what we do and how Naomi is helping our members move forward and get onto boards, I hope you'll check it out with easy scan. But JoAnna, thank you. I learned so much. I was taking notes. I hope that we'll have an opportunity again to talk. So stay tuned for, no pun intended, for your HerCsuite radio. But thank you for being here, JoAnna. You shared so much information for us, and to Naomi for a wonderful conversation. We appreciate you. And I think someone mentioned it was a good value on your time, and that's what we try to say at HerCsuite. We hope this was a good value on your time. Great to see everyone today.